Today, we meet a St. Louis cartoonist and talk about her new book. That's next on City Corner. I'm Steve Potter, and welcome to City Corner. I'd like to introduce you to our guest for this program. That is Sasha Mardou. She is a graphic novelist, a cartoonist based here in St. Louis. Sasha, welcome to the program.
It's nice to meet you. Thank you.
Wait, I don't detect a St. Louis accent.
Yeah, I'm from Manchester, England. I've been here about 14 years, but I still can't nail that St. Louis accent.
Does anyone ever ask you where you go to high school? You know that St. Louis joke.
Yeah, I do. No, I don't get that one.
But I bet your husband, I don't know, did he go to school, high school in St. Louis?
He is. He's a cartoonist also, and he was raised near St. Louis, kind of near Creve Coeur. So yeah, he can answer that question.
Who are we talking about?
He's called Ted May. Yeah.
And what kind of cartoons does he do?
He makes comics also, like graphic novels, a bit more madcap than me. You'll see some more like action and kind of superhero, but with a real twist. Yeah.
Did that profession bring you two together? Did that have anything to do with it?
It actually did, yeah. I bought one of his comic books at a show in England, and I wrote him a fan letter and a review of his book.
You've got to be kidding.
No, and yeah, so he was quite impressed with the review I wrote, and he wrote back, and we became pen pals, and then we finally got to meet in London. He has a day job that sends him overseas sometime, and yeah, we were just meant to be through comics.
So I guess you're the president of his fan club now?
Yeah, that does fall to me a little, yeah.
Well, Sasha, you know, I remember a time, I grew up with comics. But I didn't really hear about graphic comics, I guess, or at least that phrase, until I was an adult. And then for a long time, I never really quite understood what it is. So maybe I'm not the only one. Define graphic comics for us.
Well, I would say graphic novels.
Graphic novels, I mean.
Yeah, it's kind of like a kind of grown-up medium. It's like, you know, if superhero comics were kind of like the childhood and infancy and the teen years, then I think sort of alternative comics and more naturalistic storytelling. They can be about anything, and I think it's such a great medium for telling difficult stories. You know, it's something like watching a film, but also like reading a novel. You know, you're reading pictures and words. And it's great for telling all kinds of stories, not just traditional action or superhero comics.
So yeah, one thing that always mixed me up with the term when I heard graphic, it made me think like it was risque.
It does sound a little rude, yeah.
But that's not really what it means.
It's unfortunate, no. I mean, there are erotic graphic novels, but that's not what I'm making here.
Did you grow up as a kid reading traditional comic books?
Not exactly. I read the stuff for girls, so I would read kind of like romance comics and things like that. Yeah, but I didn't really grow up reading Spider-Man or.
Well, I wouldn't call your two books about Skye. I wouldn't call them romantic novels.
No, there's some romance in there, but it's more the teenage heartbreak variety, you know. Yeah.
You kind of tell me your background. I know about these two graphic novels, but what other kinds of things have you done in the past?
Well, I made lots of like small pamphlet comics that led to meeting people in the comics scene, like people who are making similar kinds of things. And it gradually grew and grew, and you make more connections in the scene until I met up with a publisher who was interested in putting together this mini comic I was making as an actual graphic novel. So that's how that came about with Revival House Press. Yeah.
And who are your customers? Who reads these? Are you able to answer that?
That's a good question. I mean, I meet people at shows, and they tend to be people who are into comics. But more recently, I've been making comics for the internet. I've been making web comics that I've been putting on social media. And I've found like a whole new audience through that. So some of the more recent web comics I've been making, I actually have a lot of therapists following me now, and
Therapy, you say?
Therapists, yeah. And so I've been making comics about the therapy process, and yeah, and I have all kinds of followers who are not traditional comics fans, but it's wonderful. Hopefully they'll want to buy my graphic novel as well.
Well, let's talk about the therapy aspect for a little bit. We've got some images from your therapy work, and so just look at the screen, tell me what we're seeing, and what it's all about.
Okay, so this is my website, which is called ifscomics.com. And it's about a very specific kind of therapy called IFS, which deals with parts of yourself. And I became quite interested in this about 2 years ago. I was doing IFS therapy with my therapist, and I would actually make these little comics about what happened in session. And I would make them just for myself.
And what's this one telling us about?
Well, this is actually like, these are three little
different
stories,
ones.
yeah. So you can click in and read the whole story.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, and they're actually made just for Instagram, so you kind of click and read each panel. You can read them on your phone.
What's this one about?
This one is actually kind of like a parenting therapy comic. It's a real life story, something that happened to me. My daughter was in the swimming pool, and this little kid who, quite confident kid, said, "Come play with me in the shallow end." And my daughter didn't want to do it, but did because she felt like she had to be nice. And so when I kind of called her back over, I was like, you don't have to say yes just because, you think you're being nice. And I think the story continues, actually, if you click on.
Yeah, let's go to the next one.
Yeah. Oh, so yeah, saying no may feel okay in the moment, but it actually leads you to doing something you don't want to do. So yeah, these are like little life stories that I've been making.
We've got two more.
Yeah, these also show like the internal therapy process and how they relate to the outside world. So when you do this kind of like internal work, dealing with parts of yourself, it actually goes with you out into the world, and you feel more confident and more calm and just able to handle things. I'm really interested in showing that internal process.
Okay, well, this is the first edition of your book.
Yeah.
The
so
one we're
moving
talking
on.
about, Skye and Stereo.
Right, and there is a connection. I mean, Skye and Stereo is also about mental health. So.
Now, who is Skye?
Well, Skye is the actual Skye. So my character, Iris, she's 17, and she ends up taking LSD in the story and has these visions in the sky, which lead to a mental breakdown.
And what does stereo mean?
It's kind of like she's having like a full-on experience. It's also to bring in the fact that music is very important to the story. Iris is like a typical teenager, very into kind of like music. She's quite withdrawn as well, and for her, like, music is this whole other world she can escape into. And yeah, it kind of like ties those things together, the title.
Well, how close are you connected with this character?
It's somewhat autobiographical, but I really decided to turn it into a fictional story. The main reason is cowardice, because then I could talk about my family, and it's like, well, it's just made up. But in actual fact,
it's not me, Mom,
you
really.
can say real things if you kind of like, cloak it under fiction. And so a lot of the characters are kind of composite, and they're very altered from my real family members. But it meant that I could say some like true things about her intense teenage years through this kind of like fictional format.
You kind of, not just in the graphic novels, but I think in everything you do, there are a couple of themes that you kind of hit on.
Yeah.
One you referred to, mental health. Why?
It's not talked about enough, I think, and I think we all suffer, and we'll all suffer as human beings. Like, no human experience is going to be hunky-dory from birth till death. We're all going to encounter hardship and suffering, and I think we're all going to struggle with our emotions at some time or another, whether we know it or not. Some people can struggle with their emotions and not actually know they're feeling emotional. We can bury things and push things down. So the graphic, like drawing comics, for me is a really interesting way in showing what's going on inside, but kind of bringing it to the surface. And so you can deal with it and you can talk about it if you can see it.
What do people get out of these? Is it just entertainment reading it? Or like when you talk about mental health issues, is there a message there for someone that might be in that place?
I think it's a very hopeful book. I mean, the therapy comics I'm making are really to that point of kind of showing the process, and also hopefully destigmatizing it a little bit, the fact that it's okay to ask for help. The whole reason I went into therapy like 2 years ago was because I was really struggling with anxiety, and it was having a kid that made me look at my own childhood and go, man, this was not ideal. There was a lot going on there which I've never talked about, never really thought about, but it's actually kind of done a little bit of damage that is healable. And so the fact that you can heal from traumas and from early childhood experiences, that is the point of my work.
That's something universal, isn't it?
Yeah.
People do different degrees, of course, but we're all the product of things that have happened to us.
Right, exactly. No family is ideal. I mean, I'd love to meet one, but no, we've all got skeletons.
I know some people that pretend to be.
Yeah, well, that's again, that's pushing your emotions down,
Right.
or perfectionism is often kind of a way of hiding your insecurity,
Right.
Like, people won't like me if I'm not perfect,
Right.
Yeah.
Let's not go there.
Yeah, okay.
Sure. So
I know you're perfect.
Yeah, well,
so, yeah.
That's what I tell people. Mental health is one theme. Another theme you deal a lot with is religion.
Yeah, indeed.
Why?
Well, in my story, in volume 1 of my book, Iris's mom becomes a Jehovah's Witness, and she actually makes a lot of life decisions based on that choice. I think we actually have a clip of there's a scene where Iris's mom has married her Iris's stepdad, and it's not really a marriage based on love. It's actually a marriage based on doing the right thing, because she wants to be a Jehovah's Witness. She has to be acceptable. This is it, This is Iris's stepdad and mom, and you can see there's divisions there, and those divisions kind of like play out into book 2. And it was an interesting way to do some kind of like healing work in a way, because Iris has this fractured relationship with her mom in book 1, and in book 2, even though Iris ends up in a psychiatric ward, she actually gets to heal her relationship with her mother.
Wait, I can kind of relate to this.
You can.
I mean, I was young once.
Maybe some teenage parts are coming up, Steve.
Being young feels like a curse. Mm-hmm. All this time ahead of me, blank and gray.
I think a lot of teenagers have that existential, that kind of angst.
Well, yeah, you're trying to figure out who you are, where you fit in.
Absolutely. And when I was a teenager, I thought I was the only one who felt like that. I felt like such a freak. Right. And having done this book, people would come to me and say...
Because people don't admit that.
Right, I know.
Back to what you said, because that shows insecurity, so
you got to be cool,
Yeah. Right. Were you one of the cool kids?
No. I really wasn't. In my mind I was, but I'd look down at other people. It's like, well, they just show off some poses, but no.
So themes, we mentioned mental health, religion, and it ties into your third theme of family issues, which you've referred to.
Right. And the fact that you can have like divisions within a family, but there are inroads to healing, but it means kind of getting a bit honest with yourself,
I read in a bio of you, I don't know if these words are yours or not, but referring to your own childhood as dysfunctional.
Yeah.
That can mean a lot of different things, from something not too serious to something pretty serious. I don't know what you want to share with us, but...
Well, sure. It's actually something I've looked at in my therapy comics, and I did a short comic about generational trauma. And it was interesting. The more I've done this work on myself and examined my own childhood, and it's like, well, why was my family like that? And then I look at my mum's history and my dad's history, and it's like, actually, these things happened to my mum when she was very young. And so then what happened to my grandma? And then I looked at my grandma's history and saw that she was 17 when World War II broke out. And she lost 2 brothers, she lost a husband, she married very young, all in the space of a couple of years. She's from a part of Manchester, she was from a part of Manchester that got heavily bombed in the Manchester Blitz. And so she was 17 and dealing with all this. And then Iris is 17 and dealing with all this. And so it's like you can start to see a pattern, things happening to generation after generation, because stuff is never brought out and healed.
Right.
And so I'm hoping that this will somehow fix me.
I like to play amateur psychologist, and I figured out no matter who you are, what kind of issues, mental issues you're dealing with, I'm making up the figures. 9 times out of 10, it's passed down from the generation before, and you may not even realize it. Exactly.
And especially as a parent, you can find yourself saying something to your kid, and it's like, my mom used to say that to me. It's like I've become my mom. And so, but the thing is, once you recognize a pattern, then you can start to kind of change it. You can start to be intentional. And so yeah, my work, my therapy comics that I put online, and my graphic novels, similar themes creep in. And I'm very much interested in how you can kind of work on yourself and kind of be a better friend to yourself, I think.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, you can explain all that when we come back.
Sounds great.
We're talking with Sasha Mardou about her newest graphic novel, Skye in...
Stereo.
Thank you. Skye in Stereo Part 2. Right. And we'll be back with more City Corner right after this.
What I love about St. Louis is the 79 unique neighborhoods nestled into 108 city parks, including Forest Park, which is actually larger than Central Park in New York, and of course, the beautiful Tower Grove Park where I'm at now. Oh, the St. Louis Blues. We've got the St. Louis Surge, 2-time WBCBL champions. We've got Harris Stowe, WashU, St. Louis University, and of course, the 11-time World Series champion, St. Louis Cardinals. So come experience St. Louis.
150 over 90.
180 over 111.
160 over 110. I had a stroke.
This is what high blood pressure looks like. You might not feel its symptoms, but the results from a stroke are far from invisible or silent. If you've come off your treatment plan, get back on it, or talk with your doctor to create an exercise, diet, and medication plan that works for you. Go to loweryourhbp.org
If I would have followed a treatment plan, I would not be in this situation.
Action!
I'm Steve Potter. Welcome back to City Corner. Sasha Mardou is our guest today. She's the author of graphic novels. Skye in Stereo just came out, the second volume. Sasha, and where do you find your books? There are still comic and bookstores around.
There are, and so Left Bank Books should hopefully have it. Apotheosis Comics will have it. They're doing a book launch on August 21st. So that's a Wednesday night. So yeah, or you can also get it online, like all the places online, like Barnes & Noble or Amazon, or I do recommend going to an independent bookseller and ordering it there.
You were talking about going to shows and things, and like Comic-Con. And
Yeah, I've done Comic-Con.
And there's a big fan base for that sort of stuff.
There is, yes, there is. I'm not really sure they're exactly my audience, but who knows, people might like drift over. Yeah, I mean, people are really interested in comics ever since the kind of like Marvel comic movies and the DC movies.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, we talked about Skye in Stereo, the first book. Volume 2 just came out recently.
It's actually coming out on the 21st will be the release for that. I think you
Coming
can
out as
pre-order
we
it.
speak.
Yes, yeah, so it's imminent. Yeah.
So there's, when we got a few images, I know in that you want to recap from the first.
Sure, yeah.
Let's take a look at those
Okay.
and explain how that fits into this whole story.
Okay. Well, it's a little recap of everything that happened in book one. So if you don't read book one, you can still
Recap it for
catch
us.
up. Iris decides not to become a Jehovah's Witness. She can't live a lie anymore. And she splits from her first boyfriend. And she diverts her grief into a fling with a co-worker who gives her some very strong LSD. And then the next.
Go to the next one.
Yeah. And after third sleepless night, she accidentally confesses to her mother and leaves home without a plan. And then reality starts getting odder and odder. So at the end of book one, she's actually taken away in a police car, and that's the kind of cliffhanger ending. In book two, she is spending the summer in a psychiatric institution. And so it was a really interesting way to do a peek behind, well, it's actually more than a peek. It's Iris's kind of like journey, a kind of subterranean journey into herself, and it's also, you take the reader with you, so you get to sort of see inside a psychiatric hospital, and it's, yeah, like what goes on in there and how she deals with it and how she kind of comes out the other end.
Well, I'm so curious how closely this really follows your story. I'm going to go there.
Sure.
So you don't have to admit to this, but
Yeah.
did you have an affair, do LSD, and then go to a psych ward?
Unfortunately, I did have an accident with her when I was 17, and it's,
No
you know,
kidding.
yeah, and I paid a pretty steep price for that, but,
But you
what
learned from
happens,
it.
yeah, I did, and what happened to me, like, really happens to Iris. Like, I'm a pretty harsh storyteller, so I kind of amplify a lot.
Mm-hmm. How long does it take you, say on volume 2, to come up with the idea, the storyline, to illustrate it, put it all together?
Yeah, it takes years. I actually began this book before I had a kid, so 10 years ago. And
Wow.
yeah, but then I had to sort of take a break when my daughter was very young. I couldn't really have the time to work on it. But I would sit in coffee shops while I was pregnant, like kind of like scribbling, and yeah. And then in 2015, the first volume came out, and it took like 3 years for me to finish the second volume.
And how big, these individual panels we see, when you do them, are they on a much larger scale?
No, because I'm trying to be fast. I draw on like letter-size paper, so like
Really?
8.5 by 11, yeah, and then it gets shrunk down to this size. So yeah, if I would try drawing really big, like Jack Kirby did, I think I'd be there for like 15 years drawing a single book. So you have to find ways to speed up.
Let's look at a page from Skye in Stereo, it's the second volume.
So this is a peek inside Iris's summer. Next come the obligatory blood test. This will hurt just for a second.
Was she just having a physical, or is she being arrested, or what?
Physical, they take your blood all the time and monitor how you're doing. And Iris says, well, I'm used to it. And the doctor gets very suspicious in the next panel. What makes you say that, Iris? Did you ever inject drugs, meaning hard drugs? And Iris is kind of upset by that. Like, no, God, I mean, you're always jabbing me. you know? So there's a kind of amount of rebellion there. She's kind of rebelling against the system in this scene. She decides not to take a medication and be a bad patient. Some more scenes from it. Yeah, again, like the theme of music and how the Skye in stereo, the stereo aspect is really...
Oh, I remember
it's what
cassettes.
she can hear, yeah. It takes you back. It's actually set in the 1990s, you know, so it's a period piece as well. And yeah, again, it's like the darker side of like the mental health industry that you get to sort of see through Iris's perceptions. And it was interesting to me writing that because you're seeing the world through her eyes, and so you're kind of taking her world at face value. But at the same time, you know, this girl is not quite in her right mind, so how much do you believe that she's saying? That was interesting to me to sort of show that. And it really is a case that she's, you know, she's kind of telling herself a story about like how she got there and why she's there. And she really has to let go of that story before she can begin to heal. So again, it's kind of, in a sense, it's what I'm doing in my therapy comics now, you know. So that's self-healing, I think.
Yeah, Iris, you know, just because you have issues or problems or poor behavior doesn't mean you're not a good person. Down deep.
Right.
Is Iris a good person?
Yeah, I think she's really trying. I actually gave my books to my current therapist, and he really liked them. And he said about Iris that he really likes her for her tenacity, like she never gives up. So she is, I mean, she's quite a tough kid.
I think that's neat you have a therapist analyzing your books.
I know, right? It kind of like saves a lot of time.
Has he ever told you that, or she, whoever it is, have they ever told you that your books give them an insight into you?
Not in so many words, but I think, yeah. It's been hinted at, yeah.
So in the second volume, Iris becomes institutionalized. I guess she's forced to do that?
Forced to do it, yeah.
Was that as a result of a certain event?
I mean, it was due to the LSD. Like, she didn't sleep for days and days, and so if you don't sleep for days and days, you will enter a psychosis, and people know this. And so a lot of it is circumstantial. And there's also misunderstandings there. When she takes LSD and confesses to her mother that she did, her mother thinks that she just took it, but really she took it a week ago. And so there's this whole, you know, like, a chain of events that could have been avoided, but of course we just really go there, because I wanted to tell the best story. And so for me, that meant taking it as dark as possible, you know. Yeah.
Well, what's the relationship with her mom? Are they close? Does she understand? Or
the fact that her mom is a Jehovah's Witness means that
she's judging her?
Feels judged and is also judging her mother. I mean, it goes both ways, you know. And so I think Iris really has to learn to accept her mother as Jehovah's Witness before they can kind of heal that bond.
Well, so the mom would be judging Iris because she's young and having an affair, doing illegal drugs.
No, because Iris hid all that from her mom.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah,
successfully?
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, kind of. You're asking me if she's a good person, and now I'm saying, well, she's this devious teen, but I think it's natural, you know? I think a lot of teenagers are like that. It's a communication thing. You don't feel like you can really say what's on your mind or ask for help. Yeah.
Well, how does Iris judge your mother because of her religion? Because I guess the religion is kind of going against everything, the way Iris is living.
I think Iris kind of internalizes it to herself. Like, I'm not what my mother wants me to be. Like, my mom wants me to be a Jehovah's Witness, and I'm not. It does get kind of dark, Steve, because, you know, this religion does see the devil in charge of the world, and this is a very real thing to them. And so this is like a very dark thing that Iris is led to believe, and she really has to sort of like get over the fear of that as well. You know, they feel that the world is ending. It's very apocalyptical.
Right.
And so again, it's another dark theme in a dark book with a hopeful ending. So,
so in volume 2, Iris is in a mental institution. What happens to her when she's there?
Well, I'm really kind of interested in, I mean, I'm a people watcher by nature, and so for me, it was that interplay between Iris and her own story that she's telling herself, and then all the people that are in there as well, and they have their own stories that they're telling themselves, you know, and then there's the nurses trying to keep everyone in line. I was really interested in that dynamic and showing that social structure. I also, just to add, my mom and two of my aunts are actually mental health nurses or grew up in that profession. So when I was a kid, I actually grew up with a lot of like ward humor. My aunt was a psychiatric nurse, and she would tell tales of like the psychiatric ward, which were fascinating to me. I'd visit my mom when she worked in an old people's home. So I was really interested in that culture of like the institution, what you don't see behind closed doors.
I did this program at City Corner a month or two ago with someone who worked at the St. Louis Psychiatric Hospital, the historic one, and she just recently came out with a book about that.
Okay.
You'd be interested.
Oh, I need
You're familiar
to-
with that place,
I
I
need
guess.
to, well, I used to walk past it to work, yeah.
Right,
So, yeah.
down near Ted Drew's?
Yeah,
Right.
indeed.
Well, so what are some of the crazy things that happen to Iris when she's institutionalized?
Crazy things that happen to her.
Maybe not crazy, but high points or low points.
Some high points and low points. Well, I mean, when she first goes in there, she sort of sees all the kind of inmates in the hospital, and she really actually sees them, like hallucinates them as people from her actual world, you know, like friends.
She's
and
not on drugs and she's
no,
hallucinating.
she's not, but she hasn't slept for 7 days, so she really isn't in her right mind, you know. And so that was interesting to sort of see people in the smoking room just as figures from Iris's life. So, you know, she's putting her own story onto these kind of innocent people, really. And, you know, there's a lot of anger and tension that she has to kind of like work through. And then it's kind of like the stages of denial, you know, she reaches acceptance. And then she really starts to sort of see how she can be helpful, you know, like part of her rehabilitation in a way is actually taking a step back and going, hey, I'm not the center of the universe. All these people are kind of struggling too.
Took me a while to realize that.
Yeah, I know. I think it takes us all a while to get there, you know.
Well, what happens after the hospital tour?
Well, she's kind of like locked up, and we skip some weeks, and we kind of see her decline, and we see her bring herself back up again. There's another scene I really like where her friends come to visit her, and her friends who, you know, they're all 17, 18-year-old kids. They've all been doing crazy stuff and drugs as well, but Iris is the one who's been caught out, you know. And that was a really fun scene to make. It was actually sad. There was a lot of pathos there because these kids are getting on with their life. They've remembered that it's Iris's 18th birthday. They've bought her a cake, and yet they all get to like leave and go on with their lives.
We're almost out of time, but
Sure.
Does it have a happy ending?
You know, it does. Yeah, Iris makes peace with herself, and she makes peace with the ward and the people who are trying to help her, and she does. She gets out of there.
Is Skye and Stereo going to have a volume 3?
Maybe like 20 years from now, I'll do a book about
I'll
right
have
now.
you back on the show then. 20
Yeah,
years?
okay.
Hey, we just have a few seconds left, but I just want to say something about, you mentioned to me before we went on, about the comic community here in St. Louis.
Yeah, there's a bunch of cartoonists who live here, and that is really what attracted me to the city and decided to make it, you know, my hometown. But, you know, I mentioned my husband, Ted May. There's also cartoonists like Dan Zetwok, Matt Kint lives here, Marie Enger. There's a bunch of really talented people who make St. Louis a home.
We have contact information for you. What are people going to find when they go look you up?
Oh, they're going to find lots of interesting gems of a story. They'll be so glad they found my website. ifscomics.com is my new therapy comics site, so I urge people to check that out, and then you can order my book online or at Apotheosis Comics on the 21st at the book launch.
Well, Sasha Mardou, thank you so much for joining
Thank
us.
you,
I
Steve.
love your work,
Thanks.
and you're an interesting person.
I appreciate
I'll
it.
see you back on the show in 20 years.
Sounds good.
Okay,
I'll be
thanks,
here.
Sasha. I'm Steve Potter. Thanks for watching. Join us next time on City Corner.